Well, hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Douglas Peake, and I am the founder of Upstream Strategies, Inc. It is a foundation particularly dedicated to returning to the core values in education that made America what it is today. I am joined today by Senator Thayn, who was a legislator in the state of Idaho for 18 years.
And 16
years. Okay, a little off. So welcome, Senator Thayn. His expertise is in education, and he's been involved in the legislature development of much of the bills over those 16 years that have impacted our educational system today. So welcome, Senator Thayn.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Peake. It's great to be here. I had a funny experience yesterday. I was going to the Idaho Department of Education website, because I do that once in a while just to look at a couple of things. I think I was going to look at the Idaho content standards.
Yes.
Because I'm going to work with some of my grandkids on teaching them science. They're like in the 3rd and 4th grade. And so I was going to look at the standards and we'll have a Zoom call, because some of them live in Pennsylvania, some of them live in Utah, and they're homeschooling. And so parents say, we don't really get to science very often. Said, well, I'll pick that up. But I got sidetracked when I went to the Idaho State Department of Education website. It talked about the flexibility guide. I wonder what this is about.
Yeah.
So I went reading through that, and it's about an 18-page document talking about flexibility Idahoans have in the public education system in Idaho. And what was fascinating is there's highlighted were about 6 of the bills that I had written over the last 16 years.
Yeah. So you had a lot of influence on that. Well, that's one of the things I want to talk about today is particularly school choice. In our last podcast where we were together, we were talking about just kind of grading the legislature in the state of Idaho in regards to education and some of the things that they did and how effective they are. And then we kind of wrapped it up with why school choice is so important, because if we fund students instead of systems, we are bringing decision points, or we are forcing parents to choose. And whenever you force people to choose, their ownership, engagement, and responsibility goes up. And we kind of discussed how our entire economic system, which is the greatest in the world, in the history of the world, was based upon that principle. And so we want that principle to be applicable in education as well. And you brought up this notion of decision points. And you pointed out 5 decision points that are all determined by the system and not the parent. Could you describe those again real quick for us? And then let's talk about why we need to bring these decision points out of the system and into the kind of the arena of the parent.
Yeah, I'd love to. I have 5. There probably are more. These are 5. That's funding.
Funding is determined by?
The system.
Okay.
Curriculum.
Determined by the system.
Yeah. The teachers.
And certification of teachers determined by the system.
And hiring of teachers determined by the
system.
Schedule is determined by the system. And facilities, the location is determined by the system. Actually, when parents determine the facility, then all those other things kind of fall into place. So what I'd like to do is talk about some of the options that parents have now that they probably don't know about, or many don't know about. So let's go with funding first.
Okay.
Now, a lot of people know about advanced opportunities.
Which is AP classes.
It pays for AP classes. It also pays for dual credit classes, workforce training, career technical education certificates, CLEP tests, high school classes during the summer, online high school classes. So it pays for all those things. That is a bill that I wrote over about a 10-year period. It's made up of about 4 or 5 different components that we finally put all together. But that's $4,125 that each student in Idaho has access to. Now, if you're in the public school, it's really easy. Beginning in the 7th grade, you can sign up and start getting this. You can go to the Idaho Education website, and they tell you about how to get started. But you basically visit with a counselor at your local junior or senior high school.
Now, let me dig into this real quick, because let's say I'm a parent, right? And I have an 8th grader, and my 8th grader is not doing very good in English, and my 8th grader is not on the football team. My 8th grader, though, is really good on guitar, let's say, and has a real proclivity for that. And so how would this help that student? Can they go to the counselor and say, I want access to that, and then they could go and do coursework at the high school level or eventually down at the university on becoming a classical guitarist?
You know, I don't know if I've ever seen someone on the list of allowed classes, which is several hundred long.
Yeah, hundreds.
I don't know if I've seen guitar. I'm sure it's there somewhere.
Yeah. But they could also, let's say they were good at working on cars.
Cars, yeah.
So they could become a mechanic and they could really get into that. Or what if they were really good at welding or...
So let's do a couple of, an academic. So let's say someone wants to be a nurse or a doctor.
A nurse or doctor. Okay. Excellent.
So you basically plot out, all right, you need to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in a hurry, you can get up to 2 years of college funded by this program while you're still in high school.
Wow.
So, and then you have to figure out what college you're going to, and there's a couple other things you need to think about as far as transferability of those credits and different things like that. But
I would guarantee you that most families in Idaho are not aware of this program.
Then if you want to be like a mechanic, you can get into, if your high school has a CTE program in auto or welding, the certificate test would be paid for through this program. The class would be paid for through the high school.
Wow. And CTE is career technical education.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's excellent. So that's really a great program.
So if you're a public education student, it's pretty easy. You're in the public school system. The law says you have to be enrolled in public schools.
Mm-hmm.
So what a lot of students at Bishop Kelly do is they take one class from Borough High School, and then they have access to these funds.
Wow.
At least, I think they have to take at least one a semester. But you also have, if you're a homeschool student, same thing. Take one class at your local high school, and you have access to these funds.
Wow.
So they're available to private school kids, homeschool kids, religious schools, public school. So they're available to everyone. Last year, you have any idea how many students took advantage of it last year?
I have no idea. How many?
39,500.
39,000 students took advantage of it. Wow. That's pretty impressive.
So that's about 20. Well, of the senior class, it was over 55%.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah.
So and so that's something that's available to parents, and it gives them a choice option. Okay.
Yeah, there's lots of ways you could use it. If there's a teacher you don't like in government or economics or something in your high school, you can take an IDLA class during the summer, paid for by that program.
Okay, that's excellent, because my oldest son, he went to Boise State, and he graduated with a degree in applied mathematics and I want to say quantitative economics or something. Then he went and got his master's in economics, and he was in AP economics at his local high school. And they studied 2 books. They had 2 books that they were supposed to study: Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, and then Friedman, the guy that writes for the New York Times now, he had one on economics. And he said throughout that entire course, they never once looked at Adam Smith's book. They only looked at Friedman's, and what most economists know is that Friedman is a leftist economist. He's not a free market guy at all. And so he was like, even though our nation was built on the principles articulated in the Wealth of Nations, we never studied it in our AP course. So having access to this would have been excellent, because he, of course, thought for himself so much. So he argued with the guy constantly about it, and that helped him sharpen his own ideas. So sometimes a little debating is good for you, I guess. But it's good to know that you have options as a parent if you don't like your teacher in a particular course of study that is necessary for the career path for your child.
So, yes, we'll get to IDLA again when we get to curriculum.
Okay. So we're talking about you want to take what other funding options are available to increase choice for parents?
So there's one that's the Empower Parents Grant.
Okay.
It's income, it goes out first come, first serve based upon lower income and up. But you can go Google Idaho's Empower Parents Grant program. And
that helps you supplement, like with tutors or curriculum or computers that you might need. Okay.
Yeah. So you could buy online classes or tutors or piano lessons, swimming lessons, whatever, guitar lessons.
Yeah. What about what other funding options that bring more choice to the table for parents?
The other one that I'm acquainted with, there are a couple of schools in the state, online schools, charter schools, that they operate under the principle that they train the teacher and the teacher's the parent at home teaching the child at home. And so they keep like $5,500, but they kick back $1,700 for curriculum and tutoring and different things back to that family. So if you sign up with them, it's basically a homeschool situation. You get to choose your curriculum too. So when we get to curriculum, we'll bring that up again.
Okay. And what's that called?
That's out of Oneida School District. It's called Idaho Home Learning Academy. It's not the only one, but my daughter in Utah does something similar through Harmony.
Yeah. Okay. All righty. So in the area of funding, that's one thing that can bring more choice. What about curriculum? Let's move on to curriculum choices for parents that they may not be aware of.
Curriculum choices. So again, the Idaho Home Learning Academy, you can choose any curriculum. Some families choose the good and the beautiful. They have to pay for that one themselves, but it's like $50 a subject. You have 4 major topics. So for $500, you can get your curriculum fairly easy per student. And you could probably use the Empower Parents Grant for that. I don't know. I'm not deep into the details enough to definitively say, but.
So these are things that if you're listening and a parent and you hear this, then investigate it and see if it's applicable, because there's a high probability that it is. But just I want all our listeners to remember, you're dealing with the government and their bureaucracies, and you have to look for all those little potholes and pitchforks running around out there. Okay,
Yeah.
They're in there, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't investigate, because there's a high probability it will work in your case.
So that's one curriculum choice. Another one's the Idaho Digital Learning Academy, IDLA. That's the one we talked about, the econ class. Those are high school classes. You typically have to be enrolled in a public school to use them. But like I say, it's fairly easy to do that if you take one class. Usually you can find one class you don't mind taking. Another one is, I know Gem Preparatory is a charter school throughout the state. They have some brick and mortar here in Meridian and one end of 16 extended, but they're located in Pocatello. But they have an online presence. My granddaughter's going to their micro school in Emmett. So they have 20 kids in this micro school. So it's they don't necessarily choose the curriculum, but they kind of like the curriculum of this Gem Prep. And it works for them. Oh, there's probably some other curriculum choices.
So there's a lot available out there. What's interesting is there's no clearinghouse.
You're right. I have another one.
Yes.
The Innovative Classroom.
Okay.
The Innovative Classroom says if you get a group of parents together that have students that make up a classroom, like average classroom of that elementary school, for example, and they wanted a different curriculum, they could petition the school board for their students to get a different curriculum in math or English or all those topics. Reading, yeah. And the school district would fund the teacher and provide a place for them to have that class.
So the school district actually has to provide a teacher for them. What about facility? Do they have to open up a classroom for them, or could they meet off campus in a different area?
They could meet off campus.
Okay. So they would need to find something like a meeting hall, maybe a church basement,
a dance studio,
a veterans. What do they call those places where the veterans?
That's where the micro school is being held, actually, in the veterans of foreign wars.
Yeah, there you go.
In their basement.
In their basement. There you go. See, so there's all those kinds of things. Okay, what are, because what we talked about is that when the system determines, right, funding, location, schedule, curriculum, and the hiring and certification of teachers, it basically takes all the decision making away from the parent.
And the parent becomes apathetic.
Yeah, and the parents
What do
become
we
apathetic.
have to do?
Yeah.
I got to tell you now about scheduling.
Okay, let's talk about scheduling.
Scheduling. So not this session, but the 2022 session, the legislature unanimously passed a bill that said schools could get funded based upon learning, not just attendance.
Okay.
So it's called the Self-Directed Learning Bill.
Okay.
And there's several criteria you have to meet. You have to know your math facts after the 5th grade, a few things like that. Have a career plan in place, how you're planning on using the education system. But how my granddaughter is using it at this micro school, she doesn't go to school on Fridays.
Okay.
She's a year ahead in all of her subjects. When she gets done with her schoolwork, on the day that she doesn't want to be in school, she calls her mother. 10:30 in the morning, she comes and gets her.
Mm.
My other son, who really pioneered this in Chalice, he sends his kids to school 2 days a week, and they homeschool 2 days a week, 2 separate curriculum.
Oh, wow. So what it does is it allows you to basically meet the bureaucratic criteria for enrollment, while at the same time gives you the freedom to learn at your pace with the curriculum of your choice and all of those types of things. Now, is the people who use self-directed learning, are they given any funds to pursue self-directed learning, or is it just you given the freedom to do it and the school has to recognize it?
School has to recognize it.
Okay.
There's no extra funds. In fact, I had a superintendent call me today and said, didn't you pass a bill recently? Because the school system, public schools are going away from enrollment funding to average daily attendance. That means that if average daily attendance, if a student is not in school that day, they don't get any funding for that student. But a self-directed learner, they get funding for that student if they're there or not.
Or not. Yeah, and this is why a lot of people are not aware of the whole notion of absentees and so forth. And most people are under the assumption that, wow, my school really wants my child there to learn. And I'm like, no, it's all to do with funding.
Well, let me point something out. You're absolutely correct. But let me point something out here. There might be some of your viewers that are saying, well, the school shouldn't be getting funded if the student isn't there and the parents are really doing a lot of teaching at home. Mm-hmm. Remember what we're trying to do. Limited government is based upon building the responsibility and the independence of individuals and families.
Yes.
That's what we're building. My effort is not to harm public schools. My effort is to build people.
Yes.
If you want to harm public schools, don't worry about that. They're harming themselves. Let's focus on what we want to build.
Yes.
We have to focus on what we're trying to build. So don't get distracted by, some of these issues that really don't mean anything. We're not here to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
We're simply saying if a student, so take for example, this superintendent called me up and several of his students, Hispanics, and they like to work in the afternoons. So they can go to school for 3 hours a day, get all their work done, and then they can work all afternoon. Mm-hmm. And the state will have to pay them as if they're in school all day because they're getting A's and B's in all their subjects. They've got all their assignments in. They've got good discipline. They know their math facts, and they've got a life plan. If they're doing well in school, why does time matter? Mm-hmm. That's what the self-directed learner does. You need to think of it as a flexible schedule bill. That's how most people really...
Which a lot of people are not aware, but the original schedule for school where they would start in the fall and they break, in May was based upon the fact that we were an agrarian culture that time and none of the kids would show up for school during harvest and planting. They just would show up, And they're like, well, maybe we ought to organize around that. And hence now you have summer break.
So, you put together... Anyway, you start mixing and matching some of these things, And I have a presentation specifically for parental groups that want to see how they can mix and match depending on their age of their child, what they want to do, if they're more interested in curriculum or time with the family, or they need some funding, or,
Well, I just want parents to understand that there's a lot of options out there. And I want to kind of, turn the conversation a little bit here towards kind of some general principles. And that is, now that we've talked about practical stuff, is that the ultimate goal here is to allow parents to have more choice. And almost we're putting the decision making back on them, and we're taking it away from the system. And the whole notion of school choice is that we want to fund students, which parents are raising these kids. So we want to fund the student. We want the parent to be making choices and decisions on the best educational outcome for their children. And we don't want to fund a system anymore, because when you fund the system, it takes away all the power. It takes away all the responsibility. And then parents become apathetic, and all they can do is say, I don't like what the system is doing. And one of the things that's happening across the nation right now, and this is something that we need to address, is that just across the border in our sister state, they're saying now, they passed a bill that said, well, if the counselor at a school wants to transition your child without your knowledge as a parent, they can do that. So they're locking parents out of their kids' lives even more. And so we really want to turn this tide back into the direction it needs to go. So let's talk about some of the criticisms of school choice in general. One is that it takes money away from rural schools. But I don't understand, because right now rural schools only have that county only has a certain amount of students, and if you're funding the students, all that money stays there with those students.
So let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
Because I don't want to give the impression that I'm using the terminology you use.
Okay.
Part of the reason is public education system. And as you know, systems are impervious to change from within.
Yes, bureaucracies have their own cycles.
Right. So the language you used is quite inflammatory to the system. Money following the child, to them, is anti-public education, which you're not.
Now, why is that? Why do they perceive it that way? Because if the money follows the child, and they have a system that educates children, and it has the majority of children, then they should be able to say, we're going to have access to the majority of those funds because we already educate the majority of those children.
So let me give you some experience that I've been having.
Sure.
Because I've considered opening a private school, probably more of a micro school. And I thought, well, I need to kind of put the numbers together. And I realized that for $3,500, $4,000, you could have good curriculum. Of course, it has to be based more on a shared responsibility model with parents. It's not, but for $3,500 to $4,000, you could provide a really good education for most kids. However, it's costing next year about $9,000 a child in the public school system. The public school system is beset by lots of problems. They have lots of counselors. They have a lot of unruly kids. They need more money to run this system until parents start realizing they've got to take back their responsibility to see their kids are educated. Now, they can still choose public education, but kids that go to public schools that have parents that expect something are different kids than kids that go to school that the parents don't expect anything. The discipline level, the grades, everything is completely different between those two types of parents. So to have the money follow the child, if you said a portion of the money, yes, but not all of it, because the public education system is at least twice as expensive as the private sector should be. So,
but isn't that the inherent criticism of the public system?
Well,
you see, I guess the point is that if you're more concerned about funding what you have control over, you're going to rationalize that, and you're going to protect the system, regardless of the outcome for the children.
I think we're talking on two different levels.
Okay.
I agree with you in principle. Mm-hmm. I'm talking from a practicality level of how do we deal with legislators that are very pro-public education, mm-hmm. that have most parents go to public schools, and though parents are not upset, are not
so
happy.
On a pragmatic level, they don't want to be perceived as saying I'm defunding my public school
right.
for some experiment that's untested to this point. And so from a pragmatic standpoint, you'd have to say, well, so you feel that the best way to bring school choice across the board and increase all the decision points for parents is by what term would you use? Is it an incremental approach? Is it a divided approach? Is it both and approach? Or kind of how would you describe that?
Well, a lot of the choices that we have right now in public education,
mm-hmm.
like the advanced opportunities, the self-directed learner, the innovative classroom, there's a couple others. They're all my bills.
Okay.
I wrote them all.
You wrote them all. That's why we're talking to you, because you know.
I know. I worked with people. It wasn't like, well, one of them was pretty much just me. But you work with people and you get your rough edges knocked off. And it's not like I did it all by myself. But I was the instigator in many of these ideas. The direction I think that we could go right now that would fulfill. See if it fulfills your criteria. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of suggesting a bill that we do next year. It's called a micro school bill. Mm-hmm. So if parents get together, like 20, 25, 30, 40, whatever, they might have one or two classrooms, and they make a micro school. Think of a multi-age, old country schoolhouse type situation. And they have this parent organization. They go to the school board and say, will you support or sponsor this micro school? And if they say yes, then, the micro school still has the right to choose its own curriculum. Mm-hmm. They have to agree on the teacher, but there will be some funding available for that micro school for curriculum, facilities, and teacher salaries. Yeah. If the school district says no, then that micro school can get funding outside of the school system. They can have, and they would have a fairly, I haven't decided on the percentage, maybe 30% dependent upon a post-performance allocation, where you're actually paying for success. But there'd be no regulation as far as where you meet, what curriculum you have. It's more based upon how well are you doing. And so the micro school would only, at tops, get $4,000 mm-hmm. if it wasn't associated with a public school.
And if it was associated with a public school?
It would probably still only get about, the teacher would be about the same.
About the same.
But the school district would get some money.
Yeah.
The students would be counted as if they were enrolled in the public school system. Mm-hmm. So you give parents control over scheduling, curriculum, teacher, location, mm-hmm. using state funds without creating private schools. I mean, mm-hmm. you can still have private schools, but does that idea kind of bridge the gap between money following the child and parental control and trying to protect the public education system from collapse?
Well, I think it's definitely, I guess my perspective would be a step in the right direction. I think that the issue is that what people tend to do in this debate, in my opinion, is they look at it through the wrong frame of reference. It's like people who look at our economy and say, well, in order for a person to make $1 million, that means they stole it from these other people, and that's why they're poor. And so a lot of people are taught that that's how our economy works. They're taught that in the public government-run school by certified teachers who were educated in a university that did not teach them how a free market economy actually works. So these teachers are certified at universities that teach them to think economically wrong. It's not true.
So in a micro school, the parents would have to agree on the teacher.
Correct. But I'm saying it's a step in the right direction. I guess
okay.
My overall point, I'm making a core value or a philosophical point, and the philosophical point is this: is that when you're looking at the free market, what the whole point of the free market is that wealth is produced, and because it's free, there's innovation, there's discovery, there's all this stuff, right, that just explodes and creates massive amounts of new economy that didn't exist. It was out of nothing. You have something, just the cell phone, kind of a thing, and what it does. So consequently, the whole point of philosophically of reintroducing funding of students as opposed to systems is what you're doing is you're saying our goal is not to defund public schools and fund private. We don't want to take public dollars so that we can go to private school, because guess what? Many of the private schools function just like public schools. They determine the curriculum, they determine the schedule, they determine, all of these things. So the only difference is am I writing a check in taxes, right, to the public system? I'm writing a check on top of that. It's just a little extra tax, basically, to pay tuition to a private school. And I don't mean this as a criticism. I'm just saying my analysis of the way the system works. The problem with this is that it stops innovation. So micro schools are a great innovation. That's a great thing. But it's kind of like a steelhead swimming upstream a little bit. The current, is against it, so to speak. And so I think that you're right, pragmatically. We have to find ways to step towards that. But I think what's happened in American society to the point now is where it's become so bifurcated and entrenched in these two ideologies that the industrial education complex, because we're not talking about tens of millions of dollars. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, and so it's a scorched earth approach, right? And they're so ensconced. It's like, man, if we compromise just a titch, right, then what's going to happen is nobody wants to compromise, nobody wants to come together, nobody wants to innovate. So I think I think the micro school is a great step in the right direction. That may be and I always go for take what step you can when you can, because if you're going in the right direction, eventually you're going to get to where you want to be, right? I strongly and firmly believe that. But I do, from a philosophical standpoint, wonder is will it ever be able to break that absolute control over the public education system? I just read a study that just came out last week that talked about how when you introduce school choice and you fund students instead of systems, it actually improves the public schools in the same locale.
Absolutely.
Which is counter to the argument that, well, if we pass school choice, we're going to defund and hurt our schools. It actually has the opposite effect, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And what I'm trying to introduce is the concept there's quite a few flavors of school choice.
Yes.
And I'm trying to explain some flavors that have passed that parents maybe don't know about, and a flavor that I think can pass.
So and that's really the key, is because this is what I thought was really interesting, is that you in M. Scott Grow, is that correct?
C. Scott Grow,
C.
yeah.
Scott Grow, okay. Were because they had changed your districts, so you guys were running for the same seat, and you're both Republicans, correct? And so you were running for that, and he won. And what I found is really interesting is he voted against that stuff. And if you would have won, you would have voted for much of it. Not all of it, but you would have been more supportive of some of these things. And so I just think, elections have consequences, don't they?
Well, I visited with C. Scott Grow last night, and he's very interested in a school choice bill.
Yeah.
I didn't think there was a good school choice bill this session,
Yeah.
and he wants to be involved in helping promote this idea of a micro school or something similar.
So you feel that there's a capacity right now that, as with all things, you got to start with a good bill.
Yeah, you have to start with a good bill.
Yeah.
And next session, I'm going to predict, I have some sense of the legislature, this is going to be the year of school choice that really means something.
Okay.
Instead of some of these pie in the sky ESA voucher, universal ESAs that, we can actually get something that means something to parents that they can use with their kids immediately. And I would love to be able to explain some of the things they can do immediately to impact the kids' education right now.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited about some of the directions that these things are going. So I just want to say stimulating conversation with you as always. I enjoy it very much. And I want to thank you for being here today. We went a little bit long, but I just thought it was really important for us to kind of discuss not only the options that are available, but also where we need to go in the future. So I hope that you come back and we have some more conversations, Senator Thayn.
Oh, I will. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everyone, for listening today. Dr. Douglas Peake signing off today for Upstream Strategies, Inc., a foundation dedicated to returning education to the core values that made our nation great.